Thank you very much, Justin. In chairing this committee for the last 4 years, I've brought some experience of chairing a company called Regnan, which is arguably Australia's most respected governance advisory body. And we were holding the ASX 200 to account, particularly on things like executive rem. So it's with that context that, you know, I've always taken a shareholder benefit to rem conversations, and the rest of the board here have also held that view. So I thought today we could just share some of the philosophies around our remuneration processes and thinking. We like to align our executive rem to the financial performance of the company. That's the key thing. So we've lost the size of our font, which makes me quite angry. But anyway, we will power on. Now, the fundamental driver of this business is really people, and you heard that in the chairman's remarks. So it's the balance of retaining and attracting good people and paying them fairly. And of course, it's got to be linked to business strategy, and that business strategy is high quality products into tier 1 customers around the world. We think we responsibly reward our executives across 3 components of REM, and these are firstly fixed remuneration, the base salaries based on the markets. And we've benchmarked in my time twice, and we take a view that we should be paid at the midpoint of our peer group. Peer group's not always easy to establish in a tech company, but you look at size and you look at growth and those sort of factors. The second thing is short-term incentives. And the short-term incentives are a balance between getting over a financial hurdle and the 50% which is attributed to EBIT, and the 50% which is attributed to KPIs of the individual. And then the last is long-term incentives, which are directly, in our case, directly linked to the share price. So let me just go through each of those very briefly. The fixed, and in terms of outcomes, the fixed REM, which I said was benchmarked last in 2016, has resulted in pay increases that are quite modest over the last 12 months, 0 to 2%. Secondly, the short-term incentives, despite the fact we've had a stellar year in terms of revenue and EBIT growth, on average 56% was paid out in short-term bonuses. And thirdly, on the long-term incentives, there have been no rewards paid. Because it's linked to the share price, and I'll explain this later, how it works, there have been no rewards for executives. Now, going to fixed REM, just in a little bit more detail. Fixed REM has, first of all, let's focus on the non-executive directors. And there's been no increases for the last 2 years in NED remuneration. We did add this year, because of the increasing burden on committees and the increasing demands and stringent regulations, we did add a surplus for the chair of the Audit and Rem and the Nominations Committee as well, and Rem Committee, so that was 10,000 each. But there's been no other increases. The second is to CEO Rem. Now, the CEO Rem, when Ken was appointed, he took a 9.6% increase in pay. In the last 12 months, and you'll see this in the annual report, the increase has been 2%. I might add, just in reflection, that if we were doing a global search to replace this individual, you can imagine that the base REM that we've been looking at would be substantially higher. And I think you'd be a successful candidate if we did a global search too, Ken. I'm not suggesting that you're cheap. And finally, our senior executives. Now, we acknowledge that total people costs have increased, but that really has been primarily due to the expansion of the leadership team, and a quality leadership team it is. So in that period, from 17 to 18, the increases were 4.2%, and from 18 to 19, 2%. So all of this, of course, is in the context of the revenue and the performance increases that the chairman addressed earlier. Just a little more on short-term REM, and I won't dwell on this too much, but we set a floor. We set a floor financial performance. And if you don't get to that floor financial performance, there's no short-term REM. And then there's, as I said before, there's this mixture between the EBIT performance and the objectives of the individuals. And you can see on the screen there's issues like customer growth, engineering excellence, people engagement, attraction and retention, and new technology. The board can also use a multiplier in the short-term REM, 1.0 or 1.5. We've not applied the multiplier at any stage recently. And the other thing about short-term REM is if you do get it, it has to be deferred for a year. So that's another mechanism of retaining our people. Now long-term REM, and I know this is probably an area that's not as widely understood, but 3 or 4 years ago we took advice. You might recall a lot of controversy around share options in the market. Wasn't always good for executives, wasn't always good for the companies. It was suggested to us that share appreciation, that SARS, share appreciation rights, was a much fairer option for both shareholders and executives. And let me just quickly try and, I know there's something in the annual report about this, but let me just quickly try and explain. Say there are 10,000 SARs granted at $1. And this is over a 3-year period. This is very important. It's over 3 years. And let's say over that 3 years there was an appreciation of 10 cents. That would equate to $1,000, which is paid in shares, in this case 909 shares. If there was no appreciation in the share price, no payment. So that's a very simple example of how that works. And we think it's fit for purpose. We really think the SARS scheme, even though it might be, some people have thought, well, you know, the executives are getting an allocation of shares. They're not. It's all about increase, and it's all over 3 years, and at this stage there's been no payouts. Let me move on to the next slide. And as I've said, as at this point there's been no payouts. This is only for executives. It's not for non-executives as well. And finally, to smash a couple of myths that have been flying around, as I've just said, you know, there's been no payouts, doesn't apply to non-execs. And by the way, the non-execs have all purchased shares in their own right. So just to wrap it, ladies and gentlemen, the summary slide, fixed REM remains modest, 0 to 2%. Short-term incentive in this most recent year, 56%, despite the stellar performance. And long-term incentive, there have been no payments. We continue to listen to you. We continue to listen to the experts. We continue to monitor the effectiveness of these schemes around performance. We're not going to be sucked in by the latest remuneration fads, and we do apply a really disciplined approach and take this very seriously. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.